You briefly spoke about how governments are being toppled in Asia. We have example of Sri Lanka, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal. Do you think is there a sort of any sort of US deep state at work in India to destabilize the current government or current regime?
Uh, Look, first of all, we have to understand or define what deep state means. Okay, there are multiple definitions of what deep state is. If you ask Mr. Trump, he's going to have a certain definition of deep state. If you ask other entities outside of the US, they will have a different definition of deep state. When Mr. Trump came to power, he fired lots of bureaucrats, and he said that he's cleaning out the deep state, right? He's draining the swamp and so on. So according to Mr. Trump, deep state means the unaccountable bureaucrats who serve lifelong positions in the US establishment, maybe the Pentagon, maybe other departments and so on. So that is Mr. Trump's definition of deep state, the unaccountable bureaucracy. Let's trim that down and the deep state is taken care of. From a different perspective, deep state means or could mean, it comes from a Turkish word, daulat something, I forget the full term, but it comes from, the meaning is that there exists apparently, allegedly, an unaccountable, extra constitutional, extra democratic, extra electoral, extra government center of power in the US or maybe outside the US that controls that nation. Okay, so it is something that is outside of the government, so that people can't affect it. They can't vote that sort of thing out of power. If you don't like the president, you can vote him out. But if there's a deep state that is super presidential, that even controls your presidents, then what will you do? So does it exist? Does it not exist? Well, most academics would give you the consensus that it is a controversy theory, right? But maybe it does exist because you can see signs and symptoms of that. Sometimes US presidents who don't align with certain objectives or initiatives, they are either 1963 like Kennedy, or maybe something like that 2020 happens when Trump claims that the election was stolen from him. So clearly there are powers that are clearly more powerful than the US president. The Federal Reserve Bank of the United States, right? Who owns it? Does the US government own it? The US government doesn't own it. They will say that it has, shareholders, stakeholders who are distributed among various other banks in the US and so on and so forth. But that's very muddy. It's very muddled, and it's essentially a private bank that essentially controls and owns the US economy, which means the US is owned by somebody who we don't know. Maybe a small group of people, maybe a larger group of people. There have been various business people who have said that there exists maybe, for example, the Sri Lankan born American entrepreneur Chamath Palihapitiya. He once said, and I'm sure that he regrets saying it, that it's a small group of maybe 150 men who control the entire world and all the global finances, and by extension, the global geopolitics all over. So clearly something like this does exist, a deep state. Now the question you asked is about India. Does the deep state seek to undermine India or maybe do a regime change operation in India? So we know that there is something called the color revolution model. That template has been used over and over again. You could see the first signs and symptoms of that in Central Asia, in Kyrgyzstan, etc., in the early 2000s. And then you had the Arab Spring, which followed the same template. And then you have other color revolutions that happen over and over again. And you had in the 20th century also different versions of that in various African countries where dictators were installed and they would undermine their country. They would make their country subservient to foreign powers, typically the Western powers and so on. So it clearly, this model, the color revolution template, does exist. Now, how do you execute a color revolution? You don't just put a switch on, press a switch and the color revolution executes itself. You need to have assets on the ground in the target country. You need to have funding networks. You need to cultivate individuals in the target country. What kind of individuals do you cultivate? You cultivate business people. You cultivate you can cultivate politicians, future political leaders, or existing political leaders. You can cultivate media outlets. You can cultivate journalists, academics, teachers, and so much more. So influencers.
These are the tools that a foreign government can use to destabilize any other government outside of the country. Journalists, media, and social media platforms. What else any government can use to destabilize government?
Right. So by doing all of this, you can create. So what are the means of destabilization? Is what you're asking. It's called hybrid warfare, which is a very big umbrella term, which contains lots of different tools in the toolkit. One of the tools in the toolkit is manipulation of narratives, disinformation campaigns. So what you do is that if you have in a country, in the target country, let's say multiple compromised media assets who you are funding, then I'm sure that all the media outlets in the country won't be compromised, but some may be compromised. So you use those to propagate certain narratives which erode the credibility of the government, which sow discord in the country and contribute to chaos in the country. They demoralize the country, right? That's one thing you do. You use influencers who may be located within the country, maybe outside the country, and these individuals, they read scripts looking at the camera. There's a teleprompter there. The viewer doesn't know it. And they continuously bombard the narrative that the government is ineffective and so on. That's one thing, okay? That's the disinformation campaigns. Another thing you can do is to cultivate individuals who are not in the media. For example, politicians. For example, academics. For example, people who run NGOs. How do you cultivate them? You can appeal to one of two things. One is their personal ambitions, their personal agendas, maybe the personal greed, which means you fund them. Another thing is you target their weaknesses. You blackmail them if you have anything on them. And it's not difficult to blackmail people if you know what their weaknesses are. So by doing that, you cultivate targets, you cultivate assets that you can use on demand, right? Then you can obviously use other kinds of threats. One is tariffs, one is sanctions. In case you are a powerful country that controls supply chains, trade networks, then you can create problems for the target country by cutting off supply chains. Maybe you control a network of ports in the region, and that country is dependent on various kinds of imports. So you block those imports. You create delays, very painful delays. That's how you can destroy the country's economy, and once again make the government look weak, right? Then you can also do you can do cyber attacks. You can disrupt the telecommunications sector. You can disrupt the energy grid. You can disrupt the stock market. All of this, once again, makes the government look bad. It looks like the government has lost control of the country when actually the attacks are coming from outside. You can disrupt in case you control countries that are energy exporters, maybe oil exporters, maybe oil and gas exporters, then you can arm twist those countries into delaying shipments of oil or energy to the target country, which can create chaos in the country. Right? You can support separatist movements in the country. You can fund and finance countries that are using terrorism against that country. The toolkit can go on and on.